Radio TV Phono Nut here, and welcome back to my messy workbench. What we have here today is another example of a Japanese-made tube radio that was imported to the United States. This was a gift by a viewer, and I very much appreciate it. I believe he said this radio was obtained with another radio that he purchased, and he really wanted the other radio, and since he has so many projects and knows I like to work on these little Japanese sets, he sent this one my way. And I've actually been looking for one of these little blue ones for a long time, but one hasn't shown up lately, so that all changed today. What's the name of this radio? If I can see it here, hang on. This one is a Londala. Londala. I don't think I've ever ran up on that brand. I've seen this radio branded as Claricon, Zephyr, and Monocore, and Monarch, but I don't think I've ever seen this particular brand. He says the radio is dead, and I have a sneaky suspicion it's because of a bad off-on switch. It just doesn't feel right when I turn it, but for the time being we can just bypass it to keep it on all the time, and then later down the road, if I desire to, I can try to obtain a suitable off-on switch and volume control. But right now let's get it apart and see what we're up against. Okay, we have the back removed, and one of the things that amazes me about these kind of radios is even though the chassis is basically the same from model to model, it seems like they use different brands of parts from model to model. I know the last one of these we worked on had Matsushita branded tubes in it. This one has 10 branded tubes, 12 BD6. I'm trying to think if I've ever run up on that type before. Usually this would be a 12BA6 in this application, and if I'm looking at the date code right, it's kind of smeared. That looks like maybe an 8. So if it is, this is probably a 58 model radio, and that's pretty early for these Japanese imports. That's probably about the time they started arriving here in the United States. Another thing interesting I see about this is, assuming that the antenna is original, this one has a much longer ferrite rod antenna than most of these types. Most of these have a little stubby antenna that's not very big at all, so it'll be interesting to see once we get this one working, does it have better reception than some of the others that we've worked on. Well, I knew that was going to happen. We have a volume knob that is very stuck. Doesn't want to come off. This is not one of the knobs that's held on with a set screw. This is just a push-on knob. It's being very stubborn, and in my efforts to get it off, the knob cracked and broke, and I don't want to try being too forceful with it because the cabinets are very fragile, these knobs are very fragile, and I don't want to break it any worse than it is. I'm already going to have to find another knob somewhere, but I want to keep this one at least like it is in the meantime. Well, I may not have any choice but to break this because it is stuck like chuck and it is not coming off. I've yanked on it as hard as I can, it's just not moving. Fortunately, this is a rather generic control knob, so I should be able to find another one somewhere. Well, we finally got it off after nearly destroying it. But what happens, this old plastic, it expands ever so slightly, and then it just makes it nearly impossible to get the knob off without breaking it. So we're going to have to find us another white knob somewhere. Okay, another observation, a Zephyr that I recently worked on that I believe was from 59. It used all disc capacitors except for the across-the-line firecracker. This one here appears to use more paper capacitors, so it's probably indeed a bit older. And like I previously stated, I think this is from 58. The speaker cone is in good shape, but unfortunately we have a rubbing voice coil, and this is an oddball mount speaker. We ran into that same problem with a Claricon radio that's similar to this, and I had to jake leg another speaker to be able to mount one, but I might try to repair the cone on this one, see if we can put some shims down in there to stabilize the voice coil in the correct position, and then we'll moisten the cone and let it dry, and hopefully it'll reform in the correct shape and won't be rubbing anymore. But first we need to get the radio playing. Okay, this is a hot chassis set, meaning that one side of the line is connected directly to the chassis. They have the switch in the hot side of the line. This chassis mounting bracket, it is isolated from the main chassis, so that's good. Alright, capacitor breakdown. This one here is a 0.05 microfarad. It's our across the line interference suppression firecracker explodomatic capacitor. This capacitor here is our plate bypass cap for the output tube. This capacitor here couples our plate of the 12AV6 to the screen, or the control grid of the 50C5. This capacitor here is our volume control coupling capacitor. And this capacitor here looks like our AVC filter capacitor. And that's all of the paper capacitors. And then we have this electrolytic filter over here. Okay, the power switch appears to be shorted in the on position. However, we have no continuity when measuring across the AC inputs. The most likely cause is one of these tube filaments is probably open. So we're going to check the continuity of each tube filament, and I'll tell you what I find. Okay, our culprit was an open filament on the 50C5 audio output tube. This filament string is like an old-fashioned Christmas tree light string. They're all wired in series, so if one tube filament opens up, the radio will be totally dead. Now, we have it plugged in. I've taken the firecracker cap out of circuit, and we're going to turn it on and bring it up slowly and see if anything happens. And since we're almost out of time on the memory card, I'll turn it off for a second and come back when something happens. Alright, sounds like the filter capacitor's shot. You notice the 60 cycle hum there. However, we have reception. And it's only at 50 volts line input, and I'm already getting some, well, about 60 volts actually, but I'm even getting some distant stations, so that's impressive. So, got to replace this guy, and that's going to entail mounting a terminal strip somewhere under the chassis, probably in this vicinity, and then wiring in new capacitors there, and we'll leave the old one in circuit or on the chassis disconnected. Alright, here we are, all of the capacitors replaced. Now, one thing about the Japanese, or at least with these little radios, is they rarely ever made actual mechanical connections. For example, they would just run the lead from the capacitor through the eyelet in the tube socket terminal and then solder it in place with no mechanical connection. And I did it the same way, and the reason being, and this is probably the reason they did it too, is because these components, leads and terminals and what have you, are very fragile, more fragile than what's typically found in USA made stuff. And I didn't want to take the chance of breaking off a tube socket pin by doing any unnecessary bending. So I just did it exactly the way they did it, and it turned out okay. Now this safety capacitor, I did not do that as good as I could have, because this potentiometer is going to be replaced anyway. In fact, I have one on order. Found one on eBay from a USA seller. They say they're based out of California. It's supposed to be here in about a week, but you know how that goes. I think the potentiometer was $1 and something, and the shipping was $4 something. Go figure. But it looks nearly identical to the one that's in here, which, by the way, has flaked out. I guess me moving and bending these terminals here to install these components did it in. So now we just wait on the new part to arrive. See, when we turn it up, it just goes away. And if we hold it a certain way, it will work.
Getting ready in the morning is
this pot is bad.
Make you more productive. In fact, getting dressed.
Now, as far as the speaker with its rubbing voice coil, it actually doesn't sound too bad like it is. And no more than I'm going to play this radio, I may just leave it alone. Because, you know, I could try to repair it, and it could go wrong and make the speaker worse. And since this is a specialty mounted speaker that's being used to hold the antenna in place and is not mounted to the chassis in a conventional way, then I don't want to rock the boat.
That would blow the bingo card.
Now, I could get lucky and it could be just dust inside the gap here, and me playing the radio might work the dust free and dislodge it. I've had that happen a few times. We can only hope. This radio is pretty sensitive. It's about 4:30 in the afternoon, not even dark yet, and I'm pretty sure that's 870 WWL coming in out of New Orleans. So that's not bad. Yeah, you can't hardly hear it, but there's WSM barely coming in. Figuring about another half hour it'll be coming in a lot clearer. So for one of these types of sets, it's not bad. Yeah, I'm having to hold the volume control shaft to apply pressure to it to make it operate. But right now, this is about all I can do to this until the new volume control gets here. Alright, back on the little Japanese radio, we got the new volume pot in yesterday, and I just installed it. However, our performance is in the toilet. I'm getting one station if I hold my mouth right.
Somebody wearing blaze on it, even just a hat, even if it's just a hat, man, you can see that thing. You know exactly what you're looking at, right? Versus somebody who's wearing camo out there, and I get it. I mean,
I'd love to know what station we're actually receiving at the top end of the dial. Alright, 1010 is coming in way at the top of the dial, and only if I touch the antenna coil, and which tells us the oscillator is way out of whack here. And when I tap the 12BE6 tube, I think that 12BE6 tube is defective. So let's go try another one and see if that straightens it out. Okay, the original 12BE6 didn't show any ill effects in the tube tester, but I swapped it out anyway. Now let's see if it makes any difference. Got a feeling it's probably not going to. And it's not making one difference at all. Oh, so it's the 12AV6 that's going berserk. Okay, let's check that one. Alright, I swapped the IF amplifier tube and checked this detector and first audio tube. It's good. Doesn't seem to be a tube issue. When I press on the speaker, so we've got a loose connection here somewhere. That shouldn't be a surprise. These little Japanese radios are known to have bad connections in them. Okay, we either have a loose connection somewhere or we have something that's getting touchy-feely with something that it doesn't need to be getting touchy-feely with, and all I know to do at this point is turn it on and start poking and prodding under here until I move something that causes a reaction, and then we'll investigate from there. When I move that resistor, it screams in pain. That capacitor. Well, heck, just about everything under here I touch, it screams in pain. Now what's weird is I can touch the chassis and nothing happens, but I can touch this rear apron here that's insulated from the chassis, and I just confirmed it with an ohm meter.
Do the quick test run and make it. Cardell speaking there on Fox.
And I get reception.
Just online at usaradio.com or on Facebook.
Well, I found part of my problem. I forgot this used a 12BD6 for an IF amplifier tube. When I was swapping tubes, I'm so used to that tube being a 12BA6, I just popped one in there, and they're not the same tube. But we're not picking up anything either. Okay, now we're acting like we want to do something. Well, now we're back to nothing, and all I know to do at this point is just start checking voltages and see if I find any that look out of whack, and I'll do that and report my findings in just a moment. Well, I'm not finding any voltage issues, but this resistor just broke off on the oscillator and mixer tube. It's a 20K ohm. It's where it was soldered right there to ground. I'm going to have to put that back and see if it makes any difference. Before we do, I'm going to check it with the meter and make sure it's good. Alright, it's a 20K ohm resistor and it reads 19.8K, so we can't get much better than that. It's one thing I can say about these Japanese resistors, most of the time they're usually within tolerance. Okay, we have the signal generator connected to the radio and set to 455 kilocycles. We're going to see if we can blow an IF signal through this thing. And it doesn't appear that we're able to. Of course, it'll be just my luck. The signal generator's taking a dump, so, you know. Alright, that's injecting a signal into this final IF coil here. Okay, in this final IF coil here, you have your plate volt, your B plus coming in here, And coming out here, going to the plate of the IF amplifier tube. And then we have a capacitor from here to the detector, so this is really not an IF transformer. But at least we know we can pass a signal from that point on out through the detector and the audio output stage, so at least we know the detector and audio is working. Alright, here's the, if I can do this. Alright, that's injecting a signal into the grid of the IF amplifier tube, and we're getting a signal there, so we know the IF amplifier stage is working, so most likely the trouble is in this mixer stage somewhere. However, when I inject a signal here at the grid of the mixer tube, I get absolutely nothing, so that tells us where the trouble is. And when I check from the mixer grid to ground, we have a dead short, so that's the only thing I can think of that could be is the tuning condenser. Alright, I found a problem. Don't think it's going to be all the problems, but this is why the 455 kilohertz IF signal was not getting through the mixer stage. There was a blob of solder where this was poorly soldered to begin with, and it was intermittently touching the frame of the tuning condenser, which of course is connected to ground. But we've solved that problem now, and I had to repair this wire because as I was disconnecting it, the insulation melted back, so I just slid a piece of shrink tubing over it. Now, let's plug the radio in and see what kind of stupidity it does. Okay, something that resembles normal is taking place.
For another recount at the request of President Trump's campaign, federal and state agents are investigating threats against top Georgia election officials. His office
For South Dakota. Thanksgiving. You're not going to see an increase until weeks later. Things lag. So what you don't want to see is another spike in cases as we get colder and colder and then you start dealing with the Christmas holiday. We can really be in a very difficult situation. So you want to tell people to please seriously consider decisions that you make. This is USA.
Yeah, I always consider decisions that I make.
We are going to take this country back. We are not going to be intimidated. We are not going to back down.
Also at SRNnews.com, FDA has granted emergency authorization for the treatment of...
Right here. This is Fox Radio Studios. Pediatric patients at least 12 years old who have progressing to severe disease. The company said it could have enough doses for around 80,000 patients.
Don't with this. Get a wide variety of all your servings of whole fruits and vegetables without having to leave your home.
Alright, here's what I think took place that caused us so much grief. Number one was this resistor that was not making good connection, and whenever I moved it, it just broke off. And then number two, the connection on the tuning condenser that we just fixed. And of course it didn't help matters any whenever I was tube swapping that I plugged a 12BA6 where a 12BD6 is supposed to be. That's a tube I don't really recall ever running into before. The IF amplifier in these types of sets is almost always a 12BA6, and I just forgot all about it being different in this set, so I hope we're fixed now. And as far as this speaker, yeah, the voice coil is rubbing a little bit, but it doesn't sound too bad, and you know, this is not one that I'm going to play a great deal anyway, so I think we're going to leave it alone. If it sounds halfway decent, just leave it be. I don't want to attempt to repair this, and and end up making it worse than it is, and then end up having to plug some kind of speaker in here. If I were to attempt to repair this, what I would do is carefully cut out the dust cap. That's the little round thing in the center. And then I would find some shims to run down between the voice coil and the magnet to hold it in the proper position. And then I would wet this cone and spider and all that, and then let it dry thoroughly. And then once it dried, pull the shims out. And then maybe things would reform and the voice coil would not rub. But like I said, I'm not pushing my luck here. This thing, it plays, I can listen to it. It doesn't really sound like it's rubbing, you know, that scratchy, raspy sound that you get. So we're not going to mess with it until we have to.
FM 910 AM. He'll make it all.
Alright, here we are in all of its shrillness, something these little sets were known for. We're all back together, and all I have to do now is find a replacement volume knob, and this thing will be ready to display. And believe me, I tried everything to get that knob off without breaking it, but it just wasn't coming. And I ran into a few situations like that before.
Can you elaborate a little more on that, and what exactly is a flexication? I know we've talked about it in the past, but let's talk about that. Yeah.
In some cases, a knob would be loose on its shaft, and people would super glue the knob on, and that might have been what happened here.
They might be going Monday through Friday.
But like I said at the beginning of this video, this is a fairly generic style white slip-on knob, so I should be able to find something that looks similar to the original without too much difficulty.
But then wanted to combine that.
You know, now we at least feel like a field goal doesn't tie.
All right, there you go.
In order to win, and on top of.
You're listening to WMER Radio 93.1 FM and 1390 AM, your hometown good news gospel radio in Meridian, Mississippi.
Hearing Gain Hearing Services, your local 31 to 28.
With my colleagues and with myself, that I'm going to work from 10 to 10.
Bob comes to Thanksgiving dinner, and he's in
Special holiday hours.
Hey, small business owners, I'm going to let you in on a secret. If you're getting internet from...
And to the person who sent this to me, you know who you are. Once again, I thank you very much, and it's greatly appreciated, and this will become a prized addition to my radio collection.
Megabits per second and business phone for only $69.98.
I didn't mean to type smart twice. Dialer direct.
Hardest. Call 855.
Safer than a large one.
You can just start filing away properties. It's kind of like the Pinterest of the...
All right, there you go. Another one saved, and more to come later.